For decades, Ali MacGraw was the face of effortless elegance, the woman who made an entire generation believe in love with one simple line: "Love means never having to say you're sorry." The world adored her. Magazine covers called her America's sweetheart. Critics praised her natural grace, and audiences saw her as the embodiment of purity in a chaotic Hollywood. But what if that line, the one etched into movie history, couldn't be further from the truth? What if the woman who defined cinematic romance was living a love story that felt more like survival? Behind the dazzling veneer of Hollywood's golden couple lay a story darker than any movie script. At 85, Ali MacGraw is finally peeling back the curtain on what it truly meant to be married to the king of cool, Steve McQueen, a man worshipped by millions, yet haunted by his own demons. Their marriage glittered for the cameras, but inside, it left scars she would carry for a lifetime. You've seen the photos, right? The perfect pair, all smiles beside a Mustang, the definition of power and passion. But what if those smiles masked isolation, fear, and sacrifice? The kind of loneliness fame could never fix. To understand, we need to return to the very beginning. The moment Hollywood's most desired woman met the man who would change everything. The illusion of the perfect couple. It was 1972, a decade defined by rebellion, risk, and the pursuit of freedom. America was falling in love with danger, and Steve McQueen was its living symbol. He wasn't just a movie star, he was an idea. The man who raced cars at insane speeds, did his own stunts, and somehow made defiance look like art. He was magnetic, mysterious, and mercilessly cool. The kind of man who didn't follow rules because he believed he was the rule. Ali MacGraw, on the other hand, was Hollywood's calm before the storm. Serene, educated, effortlessly elegant. She carried herself like she was from another era. After Love Story became a global phenomenon, earning her an Academy Award nomination and turning her into one of the most sought-after women in the world, she seemed untouchable. To millions, she represented the perfect woman, intelligent, soft-spoken, and emotionally raw on screen. So when she met Steve McQueen on the set of The Getaway, the chemistry was instant. Electric? Imagine it, a dusty Texas highway, the hum of engines, and two stars whose lives were about to collide with the force of a crash scene. He walked into the room like he owned the world, Ali later recalled, and somehow you believed he did. Their on-screen romance was so real, audiences could feel it, but behind the camera, the line between acting and reality blurred dangerously fast. What began as flirtation turned into an obsession. There was only one problem. Ali was still married to Paramount's legendary producer, Robert Evans, one of Hollywood's most powerful men. When word got out, the scandal was explosive. Front-page headlines, paparazzi swarming film sets. The perfect Hollywood fairy tale suddenly turned into tabloid chaos. Yet, for Ali and Steve, that chaos was intoxicating. The danger was the addiction. Steve represented everything she thought she didn't need. Wildness, rebellion, unpredictability, and maybe that was the point. She saw in him the freedom she craved. He saw in her the peace he could never find. Together, they created a fantasy that neither of them could sustain. The seduction of control. After The Getaway wrapped, Ali did something unthinkable for a woman at the height of her fame. She walked away from a Hollywood power marriage and straight into the arms of the most unpredictable man in the business. To her, it felt like a leap toward something real. She wasn't chasing status anymore, she was chasing passion. She believed that Steve McQueen, with his rough edges and quiet rebellion, offered the honesty she'd always longed for. It wasn't about glamour now, it was about authenticity, the kind that Hollywood rarely allowed. Steve promised her simplicity, adventure, a life untouched by the fakery of fame. "We'll escape it all," he told her, and for a moment, he meant it. The two retreated to his ranch outside Los Angeles, trading champagne galas for beer in the desert. movie premieres for long motorcycle rides through the hills. They laughed. They worked on the land. They lived a kind of raw freedom that made the headlines look trivial. "He could be incredibly tender," Ali once said. "When he looked at you, you felt like the only person alive." Those moments, small, fleeting, were enough to make her believe that this wild, complicated man might be the home she'd been searching for. But freedom, as Ali would discover, came with conditions. Steve's version of love had boundaries, and they were drawn sharply in his favor. The man who despised being controlled wanted absolute control over her. He wanted her home when he was home. He wanted silence when he needed space. He wanted her off film sets, away from co-stars, out of reach. The irony was cruel. The woman who symbolized independence on screen was slowly losing it in real life. Fame had made Steve paranoid. Every man became a rival, every phone call a potential betrayal. His charm, so intoxicating in public, could turn cold and sharp in private. "You're not making another film," he told her one night, voice flat and final. Ali laughed, thinking it was another of his jokes. It wasn't, and just like that, one of Hollywood's brightest stars vanished. Not because the audience moved on, but because the man she loved demanded it. Can you imagine giving up the world you built for yourself, only to realize you'd handed it to someone who never planned to share it? The cracks begin to show. Behind closed doors, the so-called king of cool was anything but calm. The world saw Steve McQueen as untouchable, the rebel every man admired and every woman wanted. But those who really knew him saw a man constantly at war with himself. He lived on adrenaline, fueled by speed, risk, and chaos. When he wasn't racing cars or riding motorcycles, he was searching for the next high to drown the unease that followed him everywhere. But when the engine stopped and the noise faded, that restless energy turned inward, becoming anger. The silence inside their home was never peaceful. It was charged, like the air before a storm. Friends who visited the couple sensed it immediately. They looked perfect at parties, one remembered, but you could feel the tension underneath. What the cameras captured as chemistry was, in private, something more combustible. Steve's jealousy started as small remarks, questions about where she'd been, who she'd spoken to, but soon it escalated. He went through her mail, listened in on calls, convinced that betrayal was hiding around every corner. Ali, terrified of making things worse, began to shrink into herself. The once confident actress who had commanded screens with her quiet power was now walking on eggshells. Meanwhile, Steve tried to drown his own insecurities in alcohol, drugs, and fleeting affairs Hollywood noticed. People whispered, but no one intervened. Back then, men like McQueen were excused. Their rage was labeled passion, their control, protectiveness. Ali once reflected, "I kept thinking if I loved him enough, he'd feel safe." It's a line that cuts deep because it reveals the trap so many fall into. The belief that love can fix what only self-awareness can. By 1976, the illusion of the golden couple was crumbling. Steve didn't want a partner. He wanted a mirror that reflected his power. And Ali, graceful and patient as she was, began to realize she had vanished inside someone else's story. The horrors behind the glamour. This is the part of the story the headlines never told. The version that didn't fit the glamorous Hollywood narrative. Ali later described that time as walking on eggshells. Every sound, every word, every breath could set something off. She never knew which Steve would walk through the door. The magnetic movie star adored by millions, or the man tormented by his own insecurities. His temper didn't need a reason. It could ignite over a glance, a question, even a hint of independence. In public, Steve was the definition of confidence, but in private, that confidence crumbled into control. He wanted dominance, not partnership. Ali's career, her independence, even her friendships began to fade under his rules. I wasn't Ali MacGraw, the actress, anymore. she confessed. I was Mrs. McQueen, and that meant doing what Steve wanted. She had left behind a world of cameras and applause, only to find herself trapped in silence. Days stretched into weeks as she waited for him to return from film sets or racing circuits, never sure if he'd come home at all. And when he did, peace was rare. Sometimes he'd barely speak. Other times he'd explode over rumors she couldn't even defend herself against. Whispers about co-stars, friends, or imagined betrayals. The loneliness became suffocating. She had walked away from the spotlight, but the darkness that replaced it was far more consuming. The irony was cruel, almost cinematic. The woman who made the world believe in eternal love was living its nightmare. A story where devotion turned to fear, and where the line between passion and possession vanished completely. The breaking point. By 1978, the breaking point had finally arrived. The cracks that once hid behind charm and charisma had become impossible to ignore. Steve McQueen's addictions to control, to fame, to substances, and to the rush of power had consumed every corner of their lives. Allie no longer recognized the man she had once believed was her great love. The laughter that had filled their ranch was replaced by shouting, silence, and the echo of someone she couldn't reach. The king of cool was unraveling, and he was taking her down with him. Ali had spent years trying to hold their world together, convincing herself that the chaos was temporary, that beneath the anger there was still tenderness. But eventually, even her patience had limits. One morning, after another night of shouting that led nowhere, she began to pack her bags quietly, not in anger, but in surrender. Steve watched her, emotionless. Maybe he thought it was another of her threats. Maybe he didn't believe she could survive without him. But when she closed the door behind her, he said nothing. That silence was the loudest message he ever sent her. Their divorce exploded across the headlines. Hollywood's golden couple shatters. But Allie didn't care about the spectacle anymore. For once, she wasn't running from scandal. She was running toward freedom. To a friend, she confessed, I wasn't leaving Steve McQueen. I was trying to find Allie MacGraw again. At 39, she found herself standing alone. No husband, no scripts, no carefully constructed Hollywood life. Just herself, stripped bare. And yet, in that emptiness, something shifted. She could finally breathe again. She had spent years suffocating in someone else's story. Now she could start writing her own. The tabloids called it a fall from grace. But they were wrong, because every fall, if you survive it, sets the stage for a rise. And Ali MacGraw's rise was only just beginning. After the storm, Steve McQueen died in 1980, only 2 years after their marriage ended, at the age of 50. The news spread like wildfire. Hollywood's untouchable rebel had been defeated, not by a rival or scandal, but by lung cancer for Ali. Hearing it was like feeling the wind knocked out of her. She had imagined this moment countless times, never like this. Grief, guilt, anger. They all collided at once, impossible to separate. Despite everything he had done, despite all the pain, part of her still loved him. I loved him, she admitted later, but I couldn't save him. Maybe no one could. Those words were more than an epitaph for their relationship. They were an awakening. Allie had spent years defining herself through the turbulence of someone else's world. Now, for the first time, she had to exist outside it. She attended his funeral quietly, standing in the back, hidden behind dark glasses, unnoticed by the cameras that once followed her everywhere. It wasn't a scene of drama or redemption, just a woman saying goodbye to the man who had both enchanted and broken her. After that, Ali made a choice few stars dared to make. She turned her back on Hollywood. She moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, a world away from premieres and photographers. She traded designer gowns for jeans, red carpets for red clay. Fame had cost her peace, so she replaced it with stillness. There, in the desert's quiet, she began to rebuild through art, meditation, and a slow, deliberate spiritual awakening. And this is where her story takes an unexpected turn. Instead of bitterness, she found compassion. Instead of silence, she found her voice. She began speaking openly about the dangers of losing yourself in love, about control, codependency, and the invisible scars left by emotional abuse. It's tempting to remember Ali MacGraw only as the actress who captivated audiences in Love Story, but what she became after McQueen, a teacher, an advocate, a survivor, was infinitely more powerful. She stopped chasing roles and started embracing truth. Her beauty no longer came from the camera's light, but from the quiet strength of someone who had finally reclaimed her life. The reflection. Today, at 85, Ali MacGraw lives far from the chaos that once defined her life. Her home, a simple adobe house tucked into the hills of Santa Fe, is surrounded by open skies, mountain air, and a handful of stray rescue dogs that follow her like loyal companions. The woman who once dazzled the world on magazine covers now wakes to the sound of birds instead of flashbulbs. She gardens, paints, and walks through the desert trails where silence is not emptiness, but peace. In a recent interview, she smiled, that same disarming smile that once lit up the screen, and said, "I still can't believe I made it through all that drama, and I'm still standing." There was no bitterness in her voice, just the gentle humor of someone who has learned that survival itself is a kind of grace. When she speaks about Steve McQueen today, it's with a tone that's equal parts affection and clarity. "He was the love of my life," she confessed, "and also my greatest lesson." She doesn't romanticize him anymore. She sees the full picture, the thrill, the passion, the fear, the cost. "I was so young," she once said, "and I thought love meant sacrifice. It doesn't. It means respect. And maybe that's what real wisdom looks like. Not erasing the pain, but accepting it as part of your becoming." Ali calls her marriage to McQueen a mirror I wasn't ready to look into. Through that mirror, she saw both her vulnerability and her strength, the parts of herself that loved too deeply, and the parts that refused to stay broken. "He taught me who I never wanted to be," she said, "and for that, I'll always be grateful." Legacy and redemption. There's a reason people still talk about Ali MacGraw, decades after she stepped away from the camera. It's not just her timeless beauty or the fame that once followed her every move. It's her humanity. She embodies the truth that love, in all its messy contradictions, can both break and rebuild you. Her story became more than Hollywood history. It became a guidebook for resilience, for self-discovery, and for redefining what it means to survive with grace. Over the years, Ali's honesty has resonated deeply with audiences, especially women who once mistook silence for strength. She speaks with a quiet authority that only comes from experience. "The biggest mistake I made," she once said, "was thinking I had to earn love by giving myself away." That single sentence carries the weight of her journey. From rising star to devoted wife, to a woman learning that her worth was never conditional. Those words reach far beyond the glitz of Hollywood. Because who hasn't, at some point, traded a piece of themselves to keep someone else happy? Her voice reminds people that love without self-respect isn't devotion, it's surrender. Today, Ali uses her influence not for fame, but for healing. She's an advocate for addiction recovery, mindfulness, and personal accountability. Her talks blend wisdom and humility, encouraging people to face pain rather than hide from it. Her calm presence, silver hair, and unguarded laugh are proof that survival can age beautifully, that growing older doesn't mean fading away, but finally coming into focus. Looking back, the arc of her life reads like a movie in itself. The meteoric rise, the forbidden love, the downfall, the rebirth. But unlike the scripts she once acted in, this one had no director, only choices, consequences, and courage. Steve McQueen remains a legend of rebellion. Ali MacGraw remains the quiet counterpoint, proof that even those who live in someone else's storm can find their own sun again. She often says that she hopes people remember her not for love story or for being Mrs. McQueen, but for learning, finally, to stand still. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of all.